Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about some of the alternatives for Caustic Arrow that have just come up with the last batch of gem reveals. So 2 days ago, I posted my Caustic Arrow Ballista League Starter. People have been liking it a lot. They have been doing testing runs, have been very happy about it. But one thing I think I left out maybe, and that I got kind of reminded by some of these new skills, is to explain that you're not married to Caustic Arrow. When it comes to poison, and especially ballista trees, they all have very, very similar trees. There's minor differences that might occur in like certain builds, like for example Tornado Shot is going to be slightly different than Caustic Arrow because you also need projectile speed, which is actually kind of hard to do because this moss tree here doesn't work with poison damage. So that means if you scale projectile speed, you don't get any damage for it. But there is no reason that you can't just slap on Tornado Shot and try it out in endgame, right? Like this is basically a template for you to try out on. Different people like different skills. So yeah, and I got reminded by that because there's some very interesting gems that just got released. Let's go over them. And believe it or not, some of these might actually be better than Caustic Arrow. We never know. So the first I want to talk about is Scourge Arrow of Menace. This gem changed quite a bit because it's not a channeling skill anymore. It used to have, as you look right here, 190% of base attack speed, only 40% base damage. Now it has 80% of base attack speed, so a lot slower, but you don't need to channel it anymore. And 125 base damage. What changed? You don't need to channel anymore. It still has the same added chaos damage, same conversion. However, instead of having a fixed amount of spore pods that you're going to get per stage, each arrow leaves one spore pod. Now, on first glance, this Scourge Arrow doesn't seem that crazy. It seems pretty safe. However, spore pods are a little bit weird. There is certain amount of arrows back in the day that you would have to have. If you didn't know, there's certain alignments of those pods. If you have 2 or 3 arrows, they align along those arrows, and some are better against single target, some spread out better against clear. But I've never thought about actually having, I don't know, 12 spore pods with like Rain of Splinters, +2 from arrow, +1 from quiver. Then Greater Volley, right, which has a completely different alignment. I've never thought about those things because they were completely like useless on old Scourge Arrow. And yes, the spore bots only fire 6 thorn arrows instead of 9. But I mean, if you have 12 arrows, I can just imagine how good this will be for clear. It's a little bit slower than normal. Like for example, Caustic Arrow has 100% of base attack speed. But honestly, in endgame with Wilma, that might be fine. The reason I come up with this right now is a lot of people have asked me about Scourge Arrow versus Caustic Arrow, and I just told them there is just a problem. You have to ramp up Scourge Arrow to 5 stages. Your ballistas always release at full stages. That is a lot of waiting time, right? We're talking more waiting time than, for example, EA Ballista or Toxic Rain Ballista. But do I think this could be good? I think it should be tested out. I will probably test it out. I will tell you all about it. Or if you test it out, tell me as well. The biggest potential here is also clear, because one thing that Caustic Arrow doesn't do well is like screen wide or off screening or anything like that. It has very like punctured damage. So in endgame, if we're talking like deli farming or something, this could be completely nuts. Now then we have Toxic Rain of Sporeburst, basically a poison version of Toxic Rain that doesn't scale the dot. It scales actual hit damage and poison. So it fires arrows into the air just like the normal Toxic Rain. So there is a delay to it. The base duration is still 1 second. However, this one explodes after a certain amount of time. So whereas the normal Toxic Rain, you want to increase the duration so that your dot stays on the ground longer, here you would want to potentially reduce the duration or just leave it as is, because otherwise it takes longer until the explosion happens, and it's not like you get any more damage. It also comes with innately 40% chance to poison, which frees up a lot of passive points and reservation with Herald, right? It does fire 7 arrows as well, which is a lot more. And you will have to figure out the best AoE for the best overlaps here, because on 5 arrows, it's 39% AoE. On 7 arrows, we'll have to find out. Maybe I can find something on Reddit. But in general, I want to try this one out. It looks interesting. That being said, what I'm not too keen on is the amount of delay it's going to have, right? So whereas the normal Toxic Rain would, at least its dot would start quite immediately, this has an extra second, so it's kind of like an explosive arrow build, where imagine explosive arrow, but it fires in the air first, right? So I don't know if this is actually going to be good, but it's something to keep in mind. Now then we got 2 new Rain of Arrows, and on first glance, these look like absolute garbage. However, if I've learned one thing about GGG and skills like this, is you never really know how they're going to program the skill. The original Rain of Arrows had 17 to 21 additional arrows, and unless you did some extremely weird stuff with reducing the AoE to like 1 or 2 units, where you could actually shotgun all of them, usually we're talking 3 to 4 arrows. This is why nobody's playing it. On first glance, you're like, wait, 60 times what? That's crazy. But the way they spread and the way additional arrows get added on the side and not in the middle where you would want it against single target just makes it very weird. However, these have basically new functionality. On the old rain of arrows, you can see starting at the targeted location and spreading outwards in all direction, whereas on this rain of arrows, you have starting in front of you and proceeding in a line. So what that could potentially mean is that it's sort of like Bladefall, but for attacks, which definitely has more overlap potential. If we're talking like even 6 or 7 of these overlapping, you're looking at a really good skill. And I say 6 and 7 because do look at the base damage. The base damage has been reduced from 60% to 45%, which is a pretty big deal. Now, do I think this is actually going to work? Probably not, because GG has been going very safe on some of these gems, at least. So, I don't think there's going to be anything unexpected here, but I will definitely test it out for sure. And then we have Rain of Arrows of Saturation, which I think all that really happened here is you got double the amount of arrows, but you lost like half the damage, or almost half the damage, but not exactly. Once again, we'll have to see. I don't think this one has as much potential as the first one, because at most, this is going to overlap like 7 or 6 or something. And that's not going to be that great. We're going to have to see. The other one has the potential to maybe overlap 9 or 10 if something is bugged, maybe. Who knows? Either way, sounds like pretty good clear, but I don't think the AoE has really been increased, which is good, because that could cause more overlaps. Something that would have to be tested. And then last, but definitely not least, we have Split Arrow of Splitting. This could potentially be an end game powerhouse, but we don't know if it shotguns or not. But hear me out. So it has 160% of base damage, which is higher than the normal one at 120, but it does lose the 10% more attack speed multiplier. So other than that, modifiers to number of projectiles instead apply to the number of targets projectile splits towards. So you shoot an arrow and then it explodes. However, you don't need to hit a target, because the last line here says projectiles can split without hitting a target, which just means at the end of its travel destination, it's going to split towards targets. So it's very much reminds me of Tornado Shot. And if I learned anything over the years, then if a skill reminds you of Tornado Shot, it's probably busted. So it's at least interesting to note. Now, if this actually shotguns with something like Menace, and those projectiles come back just like with Splitting Steel, that could be utterly ridiculous. Now, if it works, this could potentially be the highest single target new bow skill, and it could have good clear. If you add some extra projectiles, you already have 8 splits, but you can go nuts, I guess. You wouldn't really go GMP or anything like that, but you could go, obviously, like bow, quiver, passive tree, get this to like 13 or something. On ballistas, it also sounds amazing. However, does it actually work? Will it actually shotgun? Now, looking at Splitting Steel, a lot of people are saying this is basically the Splitting Steel of bows. However, I think the reason that Splitting Steel even overlaps in the first place is that it has an AoE tag and AoE component. Very often with these shotgunning skills, the arrows actually don't shotgun. It is the AoEs that those arrows produce whenever they are at the end of the travel time. Take, for example, Fireball or Creeping Frost. However, there are 2 examples here that I want to bring up that don't have my hopes completely crushed yet, which is first up Ice Spear. However, Ice Spear says in rapid succession, right? It doesn't have the AoE tag. It can shotgun, but I think this might actually qualify it to shotgun. And as far as I know, the new Splitting Steel actually doesn't have any tag like that. Or I should say doesn't have any text like that. So I don't think we have an example of a skill to really compare this to. And if we look at Barrage, it says you attack repeatedly with a ranged weapon, which would kind of qualify it as separate attacks and not one attack with a lot of projectiles. So will it work? Probably not. I don't think they would do an oopsie like this. I mean, this would be way too much base damage if you do the math. But, I mean, the hope dies last. They put out a lot of gems, so there has to be some bugged interactions. Or maybe they want us to find new crazy stuff, but probably not going to work. Still worth trying out. I don't think these gems are going to be that expensive. And honestly, every bow skill goes this league because of the all damage can poison tincture, right? So you don't just have to look at these sterile non-conversion skills. You can also look at conversion skills. Look through all the transfigured gems and see what you can try out. Caustic Arrow is your baseline. It's very solid, but it's not like you can't try out new things. And once I tried out some of these gems, I'll make a video about it. I'll show you guys how it looks like. Obviously, if you guys find anything OP, hit me up over on twitch.tv/Palsteron and tell me all about it. I'll be league starting. Obviously, on stream, and I'll be online like probably 2 hours before stream. So if you want to hang out, check that out as well. And yeah, hope you guys have a good league start. And since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.